Hello, and welcome to the Unseen Question. Some of the most widely accepted claims in religion are also the most nonsensical. When you strip away the tradition, the rituals, and the authority figures who repeat these ideas with confidence, what's left are claims that fall apart under the weight of their own contradictions. And yet billions of people treat them as if they were self-evident truths. Take the claim that an all-knowing, all-powerful being created the universe specifically for humans. The scale of the cosmos makes that idea absurd. We live on a tiny rock orbiting an average star in one of hundreds of billions of galaxies. If the universe really was designed for us, then why is almost every part of it instantly deadly to us? Why would a designer create endless voids, black holes, and exploding stars when we can't survive outside a fragile atmosphere? The claim only survives because people rarely look at the bigger picture. Then there's the claim that a perfect, eternal God needs worship. Think about how strange that is. A being that lacks nothing somehow needs praise from fragile creatures. If God is complete, then worship changes nothing. If God is incomplete without it, then he isn't God. The idea that humans must constantly flatter a cosmic being is not only nonsensical, it makes God look petty rather than perfect. Another religious claim that collapses under scrutiny is the idea of free will in a world where God supposedly knows everything in advance. If God knows the future down to every detail, then we can't actually choose otherwise. The path is already written. But if we truly have free will, then God doesn't know the future. Both can't be true at once. Yet religions often insist on both, even though the two are logically incompatible. Some claims get even stranger. Many traditions teach that morality is impossible without God, that without divine rules, humans would have no reason to care about right and wrong. But real life disproves this every day. Millions of people who don't subscribe to religion live moral, caring, and cooperative lives. Morality grows out of empathy, social bonds, and the need to live together. It doesn't need to be handed down from a supernatural authority. In fact, religious rules often go against basic empathy, telling people to shun others for who they love, or demanding obedience to cruel laws written thousands of years ago. Perhaps one of the most nonsensical claims is that suffering is part of a divine plan. We're told that disasters, diseases, and tragedies all serve a greater purpose that we can't understand. But when children die of preventable illnesses, or when earthquakes crush entire communities, that explanation doesn't just fail, it insults human intelligence. If an all-loving God designed this as part of his plan, then love has no meaning. And if it all happens without reason, then the plan doesn't exist in the first place. Religions also claim that prayer can change outcomes. But if God has a plan, prayer can't change it. If prayer does change it, then the plan wasn't perfect. And if nothing changes, then prayer is nothing more than speaking into the air. The fact that people continue to pray despite overwhelming evidence that it makes no measurable difference shows how powerful tradition and social reinforcement can be. Another strange claim is that ancient scriptures are timeless truth. Books written by tribes who thought the earth was flat and diseases were caused by spirits are somehow supposed to contain the ultimate wisdom for modern life. These texts endorse slavery, treat women as property, and describe punishments that would be called barbaric today. Yet people insist they are divinely inspired and perfect. The more we understand history and human psychology, the clearer it becomes that these texts reflect the culture and ignorance of the time, not eternal truth. Religious claims often rely on redefining words to dodge scrutiny. For example, when asked why God allows evil, the answer is that evil is necessary for free will. But if free will requires the ability to murder, torture, and exploit, then the gift seems poorly designed. No parent would hand their child a loaded weapon as proof of love. And if God could create heaven where people are supposedly free but no evil exists, then the excuse collapses. One of the most puzzling claims is that eternal punishment is just the idea that finite human mistakes deserve infinite suffering in hell is impossible to defend logically. No human crime, no matter how bad, justifies endless torture. A punishment that never ends is not justice, it's cruelty, elevated to infinity. Yet many religions not only accept it, but frame it as proof of God's goodness. Another nonsensical claim is that rituals can cleanse sins, as if eating a piece of bread, dunking someone in water, or repeating a prayer can erase moral responsibility. It reduces ethics to magic tricks. If wrongdoing can be wiped away through ritual, then morality loses its meaning altogether. Real accountability means making amends, not symbolic acts. There's also the claim that humans are born guilty for something their ancestors supposedly did. Original sin makes no sense by any standard of fairness. Punishing people for a story about the disobedience of two mythical figures is collective blame at its worst. Yet this idea has been used to justify control, fear, and the need for constant religious authority to fix a problem that never existed in the first place. Religion often asks people to believe claims that contradict basic science: a talking snake, a global flood that covered mountains, a man living inside a fish. These are not metaphors in the way many believers insist today. They were taken literally for centuries, and when tested against geology, biology, and physics, they collapse immediately. Yet some continue to defend them, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Perhaps the biggest contradiction of all is the claim that faith itself is a virtue, that believing without evidence is better than questioning with reason. In every other part of life, we demand evidence. We don't accept medicine without trials. We don't invest money without data, and we don't build bridges without testing materials. But when it comes to religion, doubt is treated as weakness and blind belief as strength. This reversal of logic is one of the clearest signs that the claims themselves can't stand on their own. What ties all these examples together is how they depend on discouraging questions. People are told to trust authority, avoid doubt, and see contradictions as mysteries. But real truth doesn't collapse under questioning. Real explanations don't need to be protected from scrutiny. If something only survives when people stop asking hard questions, then it probably isn't worth believing in the first place. The most nonsensical religious claims survive not because they make sense, but because they're repeated often, reinforced socially, and tied to identity. Once you step outside of that cycle and look at them plainly, they reveal themselves for what they are: contradictions dressed up as sacred truths, sustained by tradition rather than reason. And maybe the real test of honesty isn't whether you can keep believing them, but whether you're willing to admit that nonsense, no matter how popular, is still nonsense. When you look closer, another bizarre claim appears in the idea of divine communication, the belief that an infinite being who crafted galaxies chooses to send messages through vague dreams, gut feelings, or through people who claim special authority. If God truly wanted to communicate with humans, the method would be undeniable. There would be no need for prophets, no competing interpretations, no centuries of bloody disputes over what the message really meant. Instead, we get fragmented texts, endless translations, and religious leaders arguing over fine details that supposedly carry eternal consequences. If clarity matters in anything, it should matter most when eternity is at stake. Yet religion insists that God's most important messages come in the most confusing and unreliable forms imaginable. Another nonsensical claim is that religious laws are timeless. Rules written thousands of years ago for small agricultural communities are somehow presented as universal for all cultures, in every age. The prohibition on eating shellfish, the obsession with clothing fabrics, or the condemnation of harmless human behaviors, all framed as eternal decrees. If these rules really came from an all-wise being, why do they look exactly like the concerns of the societies that wrote them? Why are they indistinguishable from ordinary human attempts to regulate behavior in a primitive world? Then there's the idea of miracles as proof of divine power. A miracle is supposed to be an event that breaks natural laws, yet every so-called miracle happens within the fuzzy zone of what can't be verified. Healings that can't be medically documented, appearances that only happen to believers, signs that vanish the moment you demand evidence. The grand miracles that would actually convince skeptics: amputated limbs growing back, hurricanes stopping in mid-air, diseases disappearing across entire hospitals, never happen. The fact that miracles always look like coincidences, misunderstandings, or exaggerations makes the claim empty. One of the strangest claims in religion is that belief itself can determine reality, that if you believe hard enough, you'll be saved, healed, or protected. But belief doesn't change how the world works. A pilot's belief doesn't keep a plane in the air. Physics does. A doctor's belief doesn't cure disease. Medicine does. Yet in religion, belief is treated as a magical force that bends the rules of reality. That's not just nonsensical. It's dangerous, because it leads people to reject treatment, ignore safety, and trust in fantasies over real solutions. We also see the claim that divine justice will fix what human justice can't, that the wicked who escape punishment in life will face it after death. On the surface, that might sound comforting, but it rests on the assumption of an invisible courtroom no one can see, backed by no evidence. Worse, it creates passivity. Instead of working to fix injustice here and now, people are told to trust that some cosmic judge will balance the scales later. It's a claim that excuses inaction while pretending to promise fairness. A particularly strange idea is that rituals performed in one part of the world affect the fate of souls everywhere, that someone lighting a candle, fasting, or reciting words in a specific language has a cosmic effect on people who may not even know it's happening. The concept reduces the universe to a system of magical buttons. Push the right ones, and the divine responds. Yet when tested, these rituals show no effect outside of psychological comfort. They work in the same way superstitions work, by convincing the believer that they've done something meaningful even when nothing has changed. Religious claims also include the idea that the world will soon end and that believers will be rewarded for waiting. Nearly every major faith has predicted the end times, not once, but many times across centuries. Every generation has been told that theirs is the final one. Yet each prediction fails and new ones are invented. The cycle keeps people anxious and obedient, always looking toward a promised future that never comes. The nonsensical part isn't just the failed predictions, it's that people continue to believe, even after centuries of failure. Then there's the claim that human life is both worthless and infinitely valuable. On one hand, religions tell us that humans are sinful, broken, and deserving of punishment. On the other, we're told that humans are the pinnacle of creation, loved beyond measure by God. The contradiction is built into sermons, prayers, and texts. You are nothing without God, yet everything because of God. It's a cycle that lowers self-worth, then offers religion as the only way to raise it back up. That tension is not only nonsensical, it's psychologically manipulative. Religious claims often exploit mystery itself. When explanations fail, the claim shifts to God works in mysterious ways. But mystery is not an answer, it's an admission of no answer. If the best explanation for contradictions, suffering, and unanswered prayers is simply mystery, then any claim could be justified. You could say the same about magic, fate, or invisible spirits. Mystery doesn't resolve nonsense, it just hides it behind a curtain. Another deeply irrational claim is that truth is exclusive to one tradition, that out of the thousands of religions across history, only one holds the key to ultimate reality, that billions of people who happen to be born in different cultures, taught different stories, and raised with different texts are all wrong. The sheer accident of birthplace determines eternal destiny. That's the claim. It's hard to think of anything more arbitrary. If truth is that fragile and location-based, it doesn't look like truth at all. We also hear claims that material wealth or poverty are signs of divine favor. Some traditions tell people that riches mean God has blessed them. Others say poverty is a sign of spiritual purity. Both can't be true at the same time, and neither matches reality. Wealth comes from social systems, exploitation, innovation, and luck. Poverty comes from inequality, lack of opportunity, and circumstance. To assign cosmic meaning to them is to ignore real causes and promote complacency. One of the more obscure but still nonsensical claims is that relics carry power. Pieces of bone, wood, or cloth supposedly channel divine energy. Entire industries have been built on selling fragments of saints' remains or objects tied to holy figures. Yet when tested, these items show no effect beyond placebo. If God truly invested cosmic power into scraps of fabric, it would make him indistinguishable from a magician hiding tricks in props. The list goes on, but what ties it all together is how easily these claims collapse when held to the same standards we apply everywhere else in life. If a scientific theory contradicted itself this often, it would be thrown out. If a legal system demanded loyalty while constantly rewriting its own rules, no one would trust it. If a business promised impossible rewards for invisible loyalty, it would be called a scam. But because religion operates under the shield of tradition and emotion, the nonsense is not only tolerated, it's celebrated. Another strange religious claim is that doubt itself is sinful, that questioning, investigating, or wanting better evidence is somehow an offense against the divine. But think about how backwards that is. If a claim is true, questioning should strengthen it. If something is solid, it doesn't crumble under inspection. Yet religions often treat curiosity like a threat. That alone reveals how fragile the claims are. It's not doubt that weakens truth. It's only lies and contradictions that can't survive it. There's also the claim that morality is absolute because it comes from God. Yet when you look across religions, the absolute rules constantly change. In some traditions, eating certain foods is a sin. In others, it's totally fine. In one religion, marriage must follow strict rules, while in another, those same rules are irrelevant. If morality really came from a single perfect source, why would it look so inconsistent? The reality is simpler. Morality shifts because humans write the rules, and humans are influenced by their time, place, and culture. Take the claim that humans are the chosen species, set apart from animals. Religion often insists that we're fundamentally different, made in God's image. But biology shows no such sharp divide. Humans share DNA with chimpanzees, instincts with wolves, emotions with elephants. The evidence shows we're part of a continuum of life, not a species dropped in from outside. The religious claim tries to elevate us in a way that makes no sense in the real world. Another nonsensical idea is that suffering can be inherited, whether it's sins of the father passed to the child or curses carried across generations, the logic breaks immediately. Holding children responsible for what their parents did is the definition of injustice. Yet religions use this claim to explain tragedy, justify rituals, and maintain control. It's a way of saying your pain isn't random. It's part of a story written long before you were born. But in practice, it's just a cruel way of blaming victims for circumstances outside their control. Some claims border on superstition, dressed up in sacred language. For example, the belief that holy words in one language carry special power, but lose it in translation, as if the divine depends on exact syllables, as though cosmic truth could vanish with a mispronounced word. It reduces ultimate reality to the level of a spell book, and yet entire faiths enforce strict rules about which language prayers or scriptures must be spoken in, even if most followers don't understand a word of what they're saying. Another one is the claim that death isn't really death, that the end of life is just a doorway to something else, where consciousness continues forever. On the surface, it sounds comforting, but it's also deeply strange. If eternal life is the real goal, then why does the natural world show no sign of it? Everything we observe, from stars to cells, follows cycles of birth, growth, decay, and death. Nothing in nature points to endless continuation. Yet religions claim humans are the single exception, and to enforce it, they turn fear of death into the biggest tool of control. There's also the bizarre claim that obedience matters more than understanding, that following the rules, even blindly, is what pleases God. In fact, many stories in Scripture praise people who obey without question. But blind obedience is not a virtue. It's the opposite of moral responsibility. If morality means anything, it means weighing choices, considering consequences, and acting with conscience. Obedience without thought is what allows cruelty to thrive. Yet religion often sanctifies it as the highest form of devotion. Another contradictory claim is that everything happens according to God's will, yet humans are still to blame for what goes wrong. If a disaster strikes, some say it was God's plan, but if a person makes a mistake, suddenly God isn't responsible. We are. This shifting of responsibility creates a no-lose situation for the belief system. Good things prove God's goodness, bad things prove human weakness, and nothing ever disproves the claim. That kind of reasoning isn't just nonsensical, it's unfalsifiable. Consider also the idea that faith can move mountains. Taken literally, it means belief alone can alter the physical world. Taken metaphorically, it still encourages people to think wishing is a substitute for action. But mountains don't move because someone believes hard enough. They move through geological forces. Change in society doesn't happen by belief alone. It takes effort, planning, and real-world struggle. The claim reduces the hard reality of change to magical thinking. Religions often claim that people who reject faith are secretly aware it's true, but choose to deny it out of pride or rebellion. This claim is especially nonsensical because it assumes to know the inner world of others better than they do themselves. It's a way of protecting the belief system from challenge. If someone doesn't agree, it must be because of dishonesty or stubbornness. In reality, people reject religious claims because they find them unconvincing. Suggesting otherwise is not just false, it's dismissive of human honesty and intelligence. One of the strangest contradictions is the claim that humans are small, fragile, and sinful, yet the center of cosmic attention. The universe, vast beyond comprehension, supposedly revolves around whether individual humans pray, behave, or believe correctly. It's like saying the fate of galaxies depends on what ants decide to do in their anthills. The scale alone makes the claim collapse. The idea flatters human ego, but it doesn't line up with the evidence of the universe we see. Religions also claim that love is central, while simultaneously endorsing exclusion and hatred. Believers are told to love their neighbor, unless that neighbor belongs to the wrong faith, loves the wrong person, or breaks the wrong rule. Then suddenly love disappears, replaced by condemnation. A principle that collapses the moment it meets complexity is no principle at all. If love has conditions, it's not universal, and yet religions present it as if it were the highest truth. Another odd claim is that the sacred cannot be questioned because it is sacred, but calling something sacred doesn't actually protect it from being wrong. The label sacred is not an argument. It's just a shield to stop discussion. If an idea is strong, it doesn't need to be called sacred. If it's weak, calling it sacred only hides the weakness. Another deeply puzzling religious claim is that the creator of the entire universe is obsessed with the tiniest details of human behavior, whether someone eats a particular food, wears certain fabrics, or even thinks certain thoughts. Out of all the possible concerns an all-powerful being could have, galaxies collapsing, stars forming, black holes swallowing entire solar systems, we're told he cares about whether someone works on the wrong day of the week, or uses the wrong words during prayer. The scale mismatch is staggering. It turns the supposed ruler of the cosmos into a kind of cosmic hall monitor, policing trivial details while ignoring the enormous tragedies of life. There's also the claim that human suffering is a test, that pain, hunger, and tragedy are ways for God to measure devotion. But this raises the obvious question. If God already knows everything, why would he need a test? An omniscient being doesn't need exams or experiments. He already knows the outcome. The idea of suffering as a test makes sense only if God is limited in knowledge. But if God is limited, then the very definition collapses. Another strange idea is that morality requires reward and punishment to function, that without heaven and hell, people would have no reason to be good. But morality doesn't work that way. If the only reason to help someone in need is fear of hell or hope for heaven, that's not morality, that's self-interest. True morality is caring because suffering matters, not because you're keeping score for the afterlife. The claim that morality only works with supernatural incentives reduces compassion to bribery. Religions also claim that sacred texts are consistent, perfect, and free of error. Yet when read closely, those texts are full of contradictions. The same God who is described as merciful in one verse orders massacres in another. The same scripture that condemns violence also glorifies it. Believers often respond by saying the contradictions are only apparent, not real. But if the message requires endless reinterpretation and explanation to make sense, then it isn't clear. A perfect text would not need centuries of apologetics just to keep its own story straight. One of the more unsettling claims is that children must be indoctrinated early, because without early exposure, they might never believe. Think about what that says. If truth is obvious, it shouldn't need to be drilled into children before they can think critically. We don't need to indoctrinate children into believing in gravity or the sun. They see the evidence themselves. But religions claim that children must be taught to accept without question, or else the belief may not survive. That's less a mark of truth than a survival strategy for ideas that can't stand on their own. Another nonsensical belief is that the universe was created just a few thousand years ago, complete with light from stars millions of light years away already in transit, fossils in the ground, and geological layers carefully arranged to trick us. This idea, still promoted by some, reduces God to a deceiver, one who planted false evidence everywhere to mislead the very creatures he wants to believe. If that were true, then nothing could ever be trusted, not even our senses. The claim makes not only science impossible, but honesty itself meaningless. There's also the odd claim that sin can be transferred, that guilt can be moved from one person to another, erased by sacrifice or ritual. Whether it's animals offered on an altar or a savior dying on a cross, the basic logic doesn't work. Responsibility can't be shifted like currency. If someone commits harm, no one else suffering or dying can erase it. Real accountability means facing the consequences directly, not handing them off to someone else. Yet religion has built entire systems on this bizarre idea. Another contradiction is the claim that God created humans with desires and instincts, then punishes them for acting on those desires. We're told that sexuality, curiosity, and even pride were designed into us. Then we're told those same traits make us sinful. It's like building a machine with a flaw and then blaming the machine for breaking. If a human designer did that, we'd call them incompetent or cruel. Yet in religion, this contradiction is reframed as wisdom. Religions also claim that the supernatural can only be experienced personally, that you must feel it in your heart to know it's true. But personal feelings prove nothing beyond personal feelings. People feel the presence of ancestors, spirits, and deities across every culture. The experiences contradict one another, yet each believer claims certainty. If feelings alone are the standard, then all beliefs are equally true and equally false. Another nonsensical idea is that God gives humans rules that are impossible to follow perfectly, then blames them for failing. Many traditions openly admit that no one can keep all the commandments or laws. But instead of questioning why a perfect being would design such a flawed system, people are told the flaw is their fault. It's the equivalent of giving someone a puzzle with missing pieces, then punishing them when they can't solve it. Some traditions even claim that suffering now will be rewarded later, as if misery on earth earns credits in the afterlife. The problem is that this claim discourages people from fixing the causes of suffering. Instead of demanding justice, believers are told to endure. It turns real pain into currency for imaginary rewards, while leaving actual problems untouched. Another strange contradiction is that God is said to be beyond human understanding, yet religions constantly describe him in human terms: angry, jealous, forgiving, loving, testing, rewarding, punishing. These are human emotions, human categories. If God truly is beyond comprehension, then every description is false. But if the descriptions are true, then God isn't beyond comprehension at all. The claim manages to cancel itself out in both directions. And then there's the idea that truth is revealed once and for all, but constantly needs reinterpretation. Scriptures are said to contain eternal answers, yet entire industries of theologians exist to explain, reinterpret, and update those same texts for modern life. If truth were clear, why the endless revisions? If it isn't clear, why call it eternal? The contradiction is baked into the very structure of religious authority. Another claim that collapses on contact with logic is the idea that one's eternal fate depends on believing the right story. Think about how arbitrary that is. Billions of people have lived and died, never even hearing of certain religions, much less having the chance to accept them. Are we really supposed to believe their destiny is sealed simply by geography and history? That someone born in a remote village 2,000 years ago was already condemned for not believing in a story they'd never heard. The claim makes eternal judgment less about morality and more about cosmic lottery. Religions also insist that holy leaders or clergy have special access to truth, that their authority sets them apart from ordinary people. But when you look closely, their supposed insights always line up with the culture they grew up in, the training they received, and the institution they serve. A priest in one religion confirms the truth of his scriptures, while an imam in another does the same, and a monk in yet another insists his tradition is the only way. If divine truth were actually shining through, it would be consistent. Instead, it looks exactly like human authority maintaining human systems. Another bizarre claim is that forgiveness can be granted by proxy, that confessing to a priest, repeating a formula, or completing a ritual can wipe away wrongdoing. But real forgiveness only matters when it comes from the person harmed. If you steal from someone, no ritual can erase the harm. Only returning what was taken and making amends does that. The religious version bypasses accountability by outsourcing forgiveness to an invisible authority, making it less about ethics and more about obedience. There's also the claim that divine intervention is selective, that God saves some people from disasters but lets others perish. Survivors thank God for sparing them, but by that logic, the victims were abandoned. If a plane crashes and 10 people survive, they're called miraculously saved. But what about the hundreds who died? If God chose to save only a handful, then the claim makes him cruel. If he didn't choose, then the outcome was random. Either way, the religious explanation makes no sense. Some traditions claim that human history is guided by prophecy, that ancient texts predicted modern events with stunning accuracy. But when you read the texts carefully, they're vague, symbolic, and open to endless interpretation. A war, an earthquake, a leader rising or falling. These things happen constantly. People retroactively match them to prophecy after the fact. If the predictions were truly clear, they'd be specific and undeniable. Instead, they're written like riddles, meaningful only when hindsight makes them fit. Another odd idea is that religious symbols have inherent power, that crosses, crescents, statues, or chants somehow carry a divine force. But these objects and sounds are only meaningful to those who already believe. To an outsider, they're just shapes and noises. The power doesn't come from the object itself, but from the human mind, projecting meaning onto it. That's not divine power, it's psychology. Religions also claim that life without their framework is empty, meaningless, or hopeless, that without belief in God or the afterlife, existence collapses into despair. But countless people live meaningful, purposeful lives without any need for those claims. Purpose comes from relationships, creativity, curiosity, and the drive to improve the world. The insistence that meaning requires religion isn't just nonsensical, it's dismissive of the countless ways humans create value for themselves and others. Another contradiction is that religious truths are said to be eternal, yet they constantly evolve under pressure. The same scriptures that were once used to defend slavery are now reinterpreted as condemning it. The same passages once used to justify oppression of women are now explained away as cultural. The same texts once used to oppose science are now presented as compatible with it. Eternal truth that shifts whenever society changes isn't eternal truth. It's adaptation disguised as revelation. There's also the claim that belief makes people better, that faith transforms lives, creating moral and upright individuals. But belief just as often produces cruelty, division, and violence. Wars have been fought, people persecuted, and atrocities committed in the name of faith. If belief itself were inherently good, it would consistently produce goodness. Instead, it amplifies whatever is already present, kindness in some, fanaticism in others. Perhaps one of the most nonsensical claims of all is that questioning these ideas is dangerous, that raising objections risks eternal punishment. It's a built-in defense mechanism. If you doubt, you're already guilty. If you question, you're already condemned. But truth never needs protection by fear. Only fragile claims rely on threats to survive. When you step back and look at the full picture, a pattern emerges. Religious claims that sound profound at first collapse into contradictions, circular reasoning, or appeals to mystery. They survive not because they make sense, but because they're repeated from childhood, reinforced by community, and protected by fear of questioning. The real test isn't whether you can repeat these claims with confidence. The real test is whether they hold up when you set aside fear, strip away tradition, and ask, does this actually make sense? Because when nonsense is dressed up as sacred, it can be hard to notice. But once you see it clearly, the spell breaks, and the world looks a lot more honest, a lot less confusing, and far more meaningful without trying to twist nonsense into truth. The most striking thing about all these religious claims is how fragile they are when you look at them plainly. They depend on being repeated early, reinforced often, and shielded from real scrutiny. Once the shield drops, the contradictions become obvious. An all-powerful God who needs constant praise, a perfect plan that constantly changes, rules that are both eternal and endlessly reinterpreted, a moral system that punishes honest questions but rewards blind obedience. The pattern is always the same. These claims work only when they're taken on authority. They collapse when they're measured by reason, and yet people continue to accept them, not because the logic holds, but because the cost of rejecting them feels too high. Identity, family, community, and fear of death all lock the system in place. But once you realize that, a different perspective opens up. If these claims are nonsense, then meaning doesn't need to come from them. If the universe doesn't revolve around human obedience, then it's free to be explored on its own terms. If morality isn't handed down from the sky, then it's something we create together, based on empathy, justice, and shared humanity. That shift doesn't make life smaller, it makes it bigger. Instead of bending reality to fit old claims, you can let reality speak for itself. Instead of clinging to contradictions, you can embrace honesty even when it's uncomfortable. And instead of waiting for otherworldly rewards, you can build meaning here, now, in ways that actually matter. Religious claims may continue to sound profound to those who don't question them, but for anyone willing to pause, think, and examine closely, they reveal themselves for what they are, nonsense packaged as sacred truth. And once you see that clearly, it's hard to unsee, because in the end, reality doesn't need mystery to be beautiful. It doesn't need fear to be meaningful, and it doesn't need contradictions to be profound. The nonsense was never necessary.